Hey guys, welcome back to Magic TV. My name's Craig. It's 9 o'clock and it's time for another video. And today I'm back with another one of the deep dives, which have become one of the most popular videos on the channel. So what the deep dives are is I take a particular moment in the Magic community, I take a particular magician from history, and I take a deep dive and talk about everything that went on during that period of time or that particular magician, and then lessons that we can learn. Now, the last deep dive I did was on Criss Angel, which was very, very requested. And since then, a lot of people have been saying, hey, can you do one on David Blaine, which I'm more than happy to do. However, I wanted to try and do something a little bit different on this week's video. So on this week's deep dive, what I wanted to do is I wanted to do a comparison of David Blaine and Criss Angel, and kind of talk about why David Blaine was kind of revered and respected by the Magic community, and Criss Angel really wasn't so much. Because if you lived during that period of time where David Blaine and Criss Angel were doing their thing at the same time, a lot of magicians were either Camp David or they were Camp Criss. And it was kind of two paths that split modern magic. And it was very interesting to live through. And, you know, now in 2026, when I'm filming this video, they're both hugely successful in their own way. They're both doing incredible things. They're both very high profile within magic. I think you couldn't really argue that they're not two of the biggest names in magic. But for the longest time, the magic community was split. And it's interesting to compare the two of them and their journey and see why that was, and then ultimately what we as the community can learn from David Blaine and Criss Angel. Now, if you haven't seen the Criss Angel deep dive, please do so. You can do so by going onto the YouTube channel, looking in the playlist, you'll find it there. And I will be doing a David Blaine one at some point in the future, but right now we're going to get straight into David Blaine versus Criss Angel. Two paths that split modern magic. Let's do it. So I want to start off by saying something that every magician knows. We all know it, but no one really says it out loud. David Blaine was massively respected by the magic community, and Criss Angel wasn't. You know, the amount of magicians that I speak to, and they say that the reason they got into magic was because of David Blaine. And whenever I bring up Criss Angel, people will say, oh, he's overrated, he's a hack. And it's kind of interesting because David Blaine was respected and Criss Angel wasn't, but not in the same way. Now, to be clear, before anyone jumps in the comments, I'm not making a video about who is better. That's not what this is about. This is not about who fooled more people. This is not about who's achieved more in the magic industry, or even in the general public's eye. This is not even about who was more successful. Because let's be honest, both of them have become massive. I'm willing to bet anybody watching this video, including myself, would give their left tit to be able to be in a position that David Blaine and Criss Angel are in. I mean, they've achieved so much, more than you could possibly even imagine that you could achieve in this industry. But this is about something more interesting. I want to talk about why the magic community embraced one and rejected the other. Because both of them did similar things. They both redefined magic on television. You know, you look at David Blaine, and he basically launched the style of magic that we now know as street magic. I'm not talking about Gazzo-style street magic. I'm talking more hit-and-run style magic, the sort of magic that was then adopted years later by Dynamo, right? David Blaine defined that genre of magic on TV when everyone was doing big spectacles and walking through walls of China and floating around theatres and so on and so forth. He developed a style that was very grounded, very personal, in touch with real people. And he would go on and fool people, at least initially, with things like bite out quarter and invisible decks and simple sleight of hand with decks of cards. And so many people got into magic because of David Blaine. But Criss Angel redefined magic on television as well. He was loud, he was brash, he would do stunts. You know, we would all be waiting for his next stunt that was just completely outlandish. He achieved a lot in a completely different way. But they both redefined magic on television. They both became global stars. They both built huge brands. They've both gone on to achieve incredible success. And yet, they were treated completely differently by the magic community. So the question is, what did Blaine do right that Angel didn't? If you're interested, let's go. Okay, chapter number 1 would be the timeline, because you see, who came first is an important distinction. Let's start with something simple. Timing. David Blaine, his first special was David Blaine's Street Magic, which aired in 1997. And like I said earlier, that changed everything. Close-up magic, real reactions from real people, no big stages, no assistants, just one guy and completely impossible moments. It encouraged people to get into magic all over the world. You know, when you see a David Copperfield special, for example, and you see him flying around the arena, you see a David Copperfield special and you see him escape by magic from a burning building. As a kid, as a teenager living through the 90s, you would look at that and you'd think, well, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to do that. There's no way I'm ever going to be in a situation where I can pull off something that grandiose. But when you see David Blaine, and you see him rocking up to somebody in a street and taking their quarter and biting it and putting it back, or you take, two aces and they change places in the hands of the spectator, well, then you can kind of see yourself doing that. You can imagine yourself doing that. It inspired so many people, and let's be honest. Let's be completely honest. You look at Illusionist. An Illusionist really built their brand off the back of David Blaine. You know, they built their brand and they skyrocketed in popularity because of what David Blaine was doing. It changed everything, and it inspired more people to get into magic than anything else I can think of. Then came, after his first special, Frozen in Time in 2000, Vertigo in 2002, Above the Below in 2003, and all of these specials did the same thing. They all showcased that style of magic, going out to real people and doing real magic that inspired magicians and people who wanted to be magicians to go out and do that themselves. Yes, as the specials went on, the magic became more complex, became more impossible, and there were elements of stunts built into that as well. But each one of these specials really relied on its core message that he's going out and connecting with real people, not on a big stage, but out in the street, the sort of place where you might be walking, you might just bump into this guy, right? He built his brand slowly, organically. Now, let's compare that to Criss Angel. Because Criss Angel's first show was Mind Freak, which launched in 2025. Completely different era, completely different audience expectations, and a different level of production. Criss went big, and really, really big. I talked about this in my previous documentary on him. I'll never forget the moment where he literally set himself on fire. And he had a massive group of people around him and dangling from helicopters and all this sort of stuff. It was a complete juxtaposition compared to David Blaine. And, like I said, his first special, Mind Freak, his first TV show, launched in 2005, which was after Above the Below. So here's the thing. This is what you need to understand. Blaine arrived first, and being first matters because it didn't feel like a reaction. It felt like a revolution. When Criss Angel came along, he was compared to David Blaine because there were elements of Criss Angel's act that were very Blaine-esque in that he was doing it in real sort of levels. He was performing he wasn't on a big stage. He was performing in the streets a lot of the time. But still, going back to what I talked about with people like David Copperfield, you couldn't imagine yourself doing the sort of thing that David Copperfield did. A lot of people couldn't imagine them doing the sort of magic that Criss Angel did. So that's Act 1. Now we're going to go into Act 2. So Act 2, we're going to talk about style, which is honestly the biggest difference between Criss Angel and David Blaine. See, I really do believe style is at the core of everything. If you look at David Blaine, he had a very, very specific style. He was quiet, he was still, he was almost emotionless. I think the best way to describe it is minimalistic. He kind of almost patented that approach of walking up to people very unassumingly, blowing their minds, and then walking away into God knows where, leaving his audience just completely mind blown. If you look over the internet, there's parodies of David Blaine doing that sort of thing. People acting like David Blaine, doing magic tricks and then just walking away. It's his signature style. And what made it so unique is at the time, nobody was doing anything like that. Magic was theatrical. Magic was showbiz. And he stripped it right back down. These days, that approach is commonplace. But back when David Blaine hit the scene, that wasn't really the case at all. Well, then you look at Criss Angel. He was just so different in so many different ways. He brought that theatrical edge back. He made everything theatrical, everything loud. I think over the top, aggressive branding, high energy, almost like a hype man, almost like like the lead singer of a rock band at a festival. Two completely different styles. And the fact is, Blaine's early specials, they focused heavily on street magic and reactions. Really, when you look back at those videos and you look back at those clips, it was the reactions that was the most important thing. People reacting to what they were seeing. And they were filmed in minimal, visible production. It was done on the streets. Whilst you look at Mind Freak and you look at the Mind Freak series that really kind of launched Criss Angel, there was a lot of editing, there was a lot of music, there was dramatic framing, and he incorporated large-scale illusions and big stunts into his production as well. So I think that the big difference in the style is that Blaine felt real. I remember so many people coming up to me at gigs around about that time, asking if David Blaine was real, was what he was doing real, and he really lent into that. I remember in TV interviews, he would portray that, and it almost had that mystical sort of very weird persona that he played into. It felt everything he was doing was real, but Criss Angel felt more produced. That's the difference. And I think that that's one of the big reasons why the magic community gravitated more towards David Blaine, because magicians value authenticity. And I think that David Blaine really I think he came across to the magic community as more authentic. At least that's in my opinion, looking at this. Now let's go into chapter 3 and let's talk about the real issue, which I believe to be method perception. Here's the thing with David Blaine. His magic looked like sleight of hand, psychological work, and real world conditions. You watched David Blaine, and you might even have done a trick similar to what he was doing on the streets. You could relate to him. You could see yourself doing that sort of magic. You could recognize the sleight of hand in what he was doing. Whilst Criss Angel, his magic often looked like there were camera tricks. It was impossible even to magicians, and so magicians would come up with with theories as to how it's done, and stooges and edited reality and camera tricks were things that were brought up again and again on forums. Magicians didn't know how a lot of his stuff was done, unlike a lot of the stuff David Blaine was doing. So the leap was he must be using camera tricks, he must be using stooges. The fact is, there was widespread criticism in the magic community regarding Angel's use of television techniques and controlled environments. Now, here's the important thing. There's no verified proof that everything Angel did relied on camera tricks, but the perception existed. And because the perception existed, that became reality. If you remember the discussion forums in the magic community when Criss Angel hit the market and hit the world, he was getting demolished by the magic community on a pretty much regular basis for camera tricks. And, this must be camera tricks. That's the only way it can be done. Compared to David Blaine, that wasn't the case at all. So from the magic community's point of view, David Blaine created mystery. Angel created suspicion. And that's the difference. The magic community felt like what Criss Angel was doing was cheating. because most members of the magic community, if not all members of the magic community, bar a few, couldn't achieve what Criss Angel was achieving because the perception was he was using camera tricks and editing, and that's not something they could do in their gigs. You see, magicians are kind of egotistical. They're kind of a fickle bunch as well. And, the amount of times I've gone to a gig back in the day when David Blaine hit the scene, and I was asked, hey, can you bite a coin in half and put it back together and stuff like that? And that's things that I could do. I could say, yeah, let me show you something similar. But you can't do anything that Criss Angel was doing. And so I think that led into the whole thing when it comes to, how the magic community felt towards Criss Angel versus David Blaine. I think that's a really important distinction there. So in chapter 4, let's look at the character, who David Blaine and Criss Angel were on screen. So David Blaine's character, like I said, he was a quiet observer. I think the best way to describe him is almost monk-like. Not a typical performer, not an over-the-top performer, not anything like anybody had seen before. Emotionally, completely neutral and almost slightly unsettling when you see him perform. And some of the tricks that he did in his latter series kind of lent into that. Well, Criss Angel's character was that of a rock star magician. He was confident, he was intense, he was a natural-born performer. So when you look at the character of the two performers, I think the magicians trusted David Blaine more, and they questioned Criss Angel. Because David Blaine didn't look like he was trying to impress you. It looked like he was just letting the magic speak for itself. Whilst Criss Angel did look like he was trying to impress you. And the strange thing is, by coming across as trying less, it made David Blaine feel more authentic to the magic community. I think that's kind of a big thing as well. But as well as character, I think we also need to look at audience reaction, because here's where it flips. Forget about the magic community for a minute. The public loved both David Blaine and Criss Angel, but for different reasons. People watch David Blaine and they watch him and they go, how is that possible? Is that real? They questioned as to whether it was real or not. And I know it sounds ridiculous that somebody could walk up to somebody and do bite out quarter and have an entire generation of viewers of television think, is that real? But that was the case. Maybe not now in 2026, but back in the day, that was definitely the case. And I think he lent into that, which is why you saw more impossible moments beyond the simple stuff he did in his first special, in later specials. Criss Angel, however, the general public watched Criss Angel and they thought, that's insane, that's ridiculous. They weren't thinking, how is that possible? They were in it for the spectacle. Some of the stuff he did, there was no trick to it. I'm going to set myself on fire. That's what I'm going to do. So the general public loved both Blaine and Angel, but for different reasons. And here's the thing. I don't know if you remember when David Blaine did the special where he was in a box above the Thames for 40 days. The magic community didn't like that very much. I mean, to be honest, the whole of the UK thought it was ridiculous, but the magic community didn't like that as much. And I think it's because he deviated away from the magic and he was focusing more on the stunt and not on the magic trick, right? And the magic community is all about all about the magic, right? And that's where the moment where David Blaine kind of lost the community a little bit, because magicians love magic, they really do, especially magic that they think they can do themselves. And the bottom line is, through the majority of his career, Blaine created wonder and Angel created spectacle. Both work, but one was more respected by the community than the other, and I think that was David Blaine. And then you've got, we need to talk about the criticism. Here's the thing. Criss Angel became a lightning rod. Like I said, there was criticism. I talked about this in my deep dive when I actually spoke about Criss Angel. But Criss Angel, at one point in his career, really was starting to get very harsh reviews when he teamed up with Cirque du Soleil for the Believe show. He was getting very harsh reviews from the general public. That's saying that the show wasn't very good. And that caused him to kind of readapt and change things and so on and so forth. You can go back and look at that. But regarding criticism for magicians, all the way through Mind Freak, the TV show Mind Freak, magicians would constantly talk about the overuse of editing, the overuse of stooges, the exposure concerns. And you can read those if you go into archive forums and you look at all of the various different things that were being discussed back in the day. You'll see people constantly going on about Criss Angel cheating. So the issue isn't really what he did. It was about how visible it felt, because magicians really don't like what they consider cheating, which is ridiculous when you think about it, because the whole of magic is cheating. It really is. That's what magic is all about. It's about cheating with style. But you know, they felt that the way that Criss Angel was performing his magic was cheating, and it's not fair that he was using techniques that you can only use on TV. And so what happened is they disengaged, and Angel didn't really care. He wasn't really trying to play to the magic community, so he carried on doing things that would antagonize them and wind them up more. That's probably the main reason why the magic community didn't particularly gravitate towards Criss Angel at any point. Okay, so let's talk about why Criss Angel still won. Here's the thing. Criss Angel was and still is massive. He's had global TV success. He's had Las Vegas residencies, Cirque du Soleil partnerships. He's got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. That's not failure at all in any way, shape, or form. No one would say that Criss Angel has failed. But at no point did Criss Angel need magicians' approval. Yeah, there's been times where he's actually tried to kind of be more involved in the magic community. Like I remember when Sinful first came out by Wayne Houchin, which obviously was performed by Criss Angel first on his TV show. It was Criss Angel Presents. I think he was trying to become a production company in the magic community at one point. But generally, as a rule, he didn't need magician approval. He had audience attention, and really the attention is more valuable. But in terms of where it went wrong for Criss Angel, his show Believe, like I said, received heavy criticism. Early reviews were widely negative. And this kind of exposed something important for Criss Angel. Television success is very, very different to live performance success. David Blaine's brand translated easily. You could translate what David Blaine did on TV to live performance very, very easily. But Criss Angel, his style needed adaptation. And so here's the real answer. When you look at the stuff that Blaine did and the people that he had surrounding him and the consultants and so on and so forth, it felt like Blaine respected magic's traditions and Angel challenged them. Magicians reward tradition and they resist disruption. They really do. So really, this isn't about right or wrong in any way, shape or form. It's about alignment. David Blaine aligned with what magicians value, and Angel aligned with what audiences values, what audiences value, and that's really the big difference. But what this means for magic today is this split changed magic forever, because now there's really two paths that you can go down, and there's more than two paths, but these are the two paths that I kind of think of. If you go down the David Blaine path, you're going to be kind of authentic, minimal, intimate and credible one. If you go down the Criss Angel path, you're going to be visible, branded, scalable. It's going to be a big spectacle, and modern magicians sit somewhere between the two of them. Now, the important thing, the thing that I love about these deep dives is what we can actually learn from this whole situation. And I think there's a few different lessons that we can learn about Criss Angel versus David Blaine. The first is respect and success are not the same thing. You can have all the respect of your peers and not be successful at all. Likewise, you can have no respect and everyone hate you and you can be the most successful magician in the world. It just depends on what you're looking for. It's possible, but it is difficult to have both. But it is possible. I could list a bunch of magicians who are respected by the magic community, but at the same time, they're very, very successful. But you need to decide what your definition of success is, because success is very subjective. What one person thinks of as success, another person would think of as something completely different and not. So you need to decide what you want out of magic. If you're wanting to be a professional magician, what are you wanting out of magic? What are you wanting? What is your definition of success? And do you want the respect of your peers? Is that something that you want? Because if you do, there's certain things that you're probably going to, like, you can't forget. If you want the success of your peers and you want to be successful, you can't go and expose magic. Case in point, me. In the early days of my career, I did a team building thing. And that's why I got kicked out of the Magic Circle, because I did a team building thing where I exposed magic. Now, I had people sign NDAs and so on and so forth, but that was something that really followed me around this industry. There's like a 50-page thread on the Magic Cafe. I got kicked out of the Magic Circle all because of this. Success, absolutely. These things were very, very popular, and I was doing them all of the time to the wider corporate world, but it meant that I was basically thrown out of the magic community. That's the reason. That, combined with Red and a whole bunch of other stuff, is one of the reasons why I left the industry. So you have to understand that respect and success are not the same thing. Lesson number 2 is perception of method matters more than method itself, at least within the magic community. What I mean by that is if the magicians think that you're using camera tricks, then you're using camera tricks. It's as simple as that. If they think that you're using a stooge, you're using a stooge. It's as simple as that. Case in point, one of Dynamo's recent TV specials, I think it might have been Dynamo is Dead. He did a routine where there was a glass table and the camera was pointing up. And you had a celebrity shuffle a pack of cards and deal the cards onto the table into 2 piles. And basically it was an out of this world, right? The difference is, because the camera was pointing up through the glass table, you could see that they were dealing cards onto the table and they were actually separating red and black. The entire community was convinced that that celebrity was a stooge. They wouldn't accept any other method, because from their point of view, it was impossible. It was completely impossible for what they've just seen to happen. They had no method. They had no idea of how that could be done. So they leapt to stooging or instant stooging or something like that, or camera tricks or whatever. When in actual fact, that wasn't the case. I know that because I've spoken to Pete Turner about that. Pete Turner was the consultant that came up with the method for that trick. And it is a completely and totally viable method. If you were there, you would not see anything untoward. But magicians were convinced that there was cheating, there was shenanigans going on. And so because of that perception, they decided to say that that trick was terrible because it wouldn't work in the real world and so on and so forth. What you have to understand is Dynamo and his team weren't trying to make a trick work in the real world, even though this method could work, I think, in the real world. They were trying to make a trick that would work on television, but there was no stooging or anything like that. But perception of method matters more than method itself. It's a little bit like when you go to a gig, and if you've got a kid there, and the kid thinks they know how the trick's done, even if that's not how it's done, there's no convincing them. That's what they think. They think that trick is done that way. They think they've found the trick out, right? It's that sort of thing. Lesson number 3 is character defines credibility. If you're wanting to be credible to your audiences, and depending on how you want to be successful, depends on what your audience is. But if you want to be credible to your audience, then you have to make sure that your character aligns with that credibility. That's really important. Lesson number 4, you can win without approval. That's also a really important one. You don't need to have anyone's approval to become successful. You can be successful without anyone's approval. You don't need, sometimes it's easier to become successful if you've got the magic industry's backing. Absolutely. But I left this community and became very successful without actually having anything to do with the community at all. Lesson number 5, magic has more than one correct path. And this is the final lesson. It's very, very important. And it kind of goes back to what I talked about with success. There's lots of different definitions of success. And there's lots of different ways that you can be successful in magic. You can be a successful creator. You can be a successful performer. You can be an incredibly successful business person without even being a great performer. There's so many different ways that you can find a path through magic, and that's what's wonderful about it. But those are the 5 lessons that we can learn. Here's the thing. David Blaine was respected. Criss Angel was questioned, but both of them changed magic. And the truth is, modern magic exists somewhere between the two, because you need Blaine's authenticity and you need Angel's ambition. And that's something that I massively respect about Criss Angel, his ambition. And if you can combine both the ambition and the authenticity, that's where the next evolution of magic lives, as far as I'm concerned. Because the next big thing in this industry, the next person that's going to come and take over and have a huge TV show and shape the way that magic is moving, well, they might not even have found magic yet. They might still be in school. Or they might be watching this video right now. In fact, it might be you. You never know. You know what you need to do in order to make that happen. It's totally up to you. So there you go. Criss Angel versus David Blaine. 2 incredible performers. Tell me what you think. Do you want to see another video like this? Do you want me to compare and contrast 2 other kind of performers and talk about what we can learn from there? Because I can do that. That's absolutely fine. This channel exists because of you guys. The reason I put up so much content is because of you. So make sure that you let me know what you want down below. You want to see more videos like this, like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll be back again tomorrow with another video, so make sure you look out for that. Don't forget to join the Netrix. It's my online streaming platform for magicians. You can get access immediately. And I'll see you again soon. My name's Craig. This is Magic TV.